In the sweltering summer of 1992, India's financial markets were on the brink of collapse. A wave of panic swept through the streets of Bombay as millions watched in horror as their life savings disappeared overnight. It was then that a name became synonymous with greed and deception: Harshad Mehta. This is the story of one of India's most infamous financiers, who brought the country to its knees with his audacious scam. What started as a simple trading strategy quickly spiraled out of control, leaving countless investors destitute and ruined. The ripple effects of Mehta's deceit still resonate today, making him one of the most notorious figures in Indian financial history. Mehta's rise to prominence began with a modest beginning. Born into a family of modest means, he studied economics at the University of Bombay before turning to the stock market as a career. With an intuitive grasp of technical analysis and a flair for taking calculated risks, Mehta quickly made a name for himself on the Bombay Stock Exchange. As his reputation grew, so did his ambition. He began to build a network of loyal followers who were drawn in by his charisma and confidence. They were a diverse group, comprising both seasoned traders and amateur investors. Mehta promised them riches beyond their wildest dreams, and many were willing to take the risk. But beneath the surface, something was amiss. Mehta had developed an innovative trading strategy that involved using computers to create fake buying orders and then selling at inflated prices. It was a tactic that allowed him to corner the market on certain stocks, creating a false sense of demand and artificially driving up prices. As his profits mounted, so did his ego. Mehta began to flaunt his wealth, buying luxury cars and properties that would put a Hollywood starlet to shame. He also started using his network to recruit new investors, promising them a piece of the action if they joined his ranks. But as the months went by, red flags began to appear. Investors who had invested with Mehta were suddenly unable to withdraw their money. Others reported receiving calls from Mehta's associates, threatening to cut them off if they tried to sell their shares. It was then that some of Mehta's followers began to suspect something was amiss. One such investor was a young woman named Sucheta. She had invested all her savings with Mehta, convinced by his charm and promises of easy wealth. But when she tried to cash out, she found herself locked out of the market. The more she pressed for answers, the more Mehta's associates denied any wrongdoing. It was like they were speaking a different language, Jhaveri recalled in an interview with our investigators. They kept saying that I had misunderstood the instructions and that my shares would be processed soon. But soon became never. As the weeks turned into months, Mehta's empire began to crumble. Investors who had been burned by his tactics were now seeking revenge. The government was forced to intervene, launching an investigation that would shake the very foundations of India's financial markets. The scandal led to a major overhaul of India's securities regulations, with stricter controls put in place to prevent similar scams from happening again. But the damage had already been done. Millions of rupees were lost, and countless lives were forever changed by Mehta's deceitful schemes. Today, Harshad Mehta is a cautionary tale about the dangers of greed and the importance of skepticism when it comes to investment opportunities. His story serves as a reminder that even in the most powerful of institutions, corruption can thrive if left unchecked. As we delve deeper into this story, you will discover the full extent of Mehta's scam and how it shook India to its core. You will meet the victims who were left scarred by his deceit, and the investigators who brought him to justice. And above all, you will understand why Harshad Mehta remains one of the most infamous figures in Indian financial history. Over the next few minutes, we will follow the trail of clues that led investigators to uncover the full extent of Mehta's scam. We will explore how he managed to evade detection for so long and what ultimately brought him crashing down. It's a story of greed, deception, and the lengths to which one man would go to get away with it all. So join us on this journey into the heart of darkness, where we will uncover the shocking truth about Harshad Mehta, the financial crime that changed India forever. It was the year 1989, and the Indian stock market was on the brink of collapse. The country's economy was struggling to recover from the devastating effects of the emergency period under Indira Gandhi, and the market was reeling from a series of scandals that had shaken investor confidence to its core. But amidst the chaos and uncertainty, a new player emerged, one who would go on to become synonymous with financial greed and deception. His name was Harshad Mehta, a young and ambitious stockbroker with a taste for risk and a penchant for getting rich quick. Little did anyone know that this relatively unknown figure would soon find himself at the center of a scandal that would shake India's financial system to its foundations. Born in 1952 in Pune, Maharashtra, Harshad Mehta came from a middle-class family and was raised with strong values by his parents. His father, Ashok Mehta, was an engineer who had worked for the Indian Railways, while his mother, Leela Mehta, was a homemaker. From a young age, Harshad showed a keen interest in business and finance, often spending hours poring over newspapers and magazines to stay up to date on market trends. After completing his education, Harshad joined the Bombay Stock Exchange, BSE, as a junior stockbroker in 1975. He quickly made a name for himself by identifying undervalued stocks and making smart investment calls that earned him a reputation among his peers. However, it was not until he got involved with a group of rogue traders who shared his vision for a lucrative shortcut to success that Harshad's fortunes truly took off. One of these key figures was Sudhir Parikh, a cunning and ruthless trader who had made a fortune by exploiting loopholes in the market. Together, they formed an alliance with a few other traders and started buying up stocks from unsuspecting investors at rock-bottom prices. They would then resell these stocks at artificially inflated prices, reaping massive profits in the process. As Harshad's wealth grew, so did his ambition. He began to build a network of loyal followers who were eager to ride the wave of success with him. Together, they created a sense of excitement and urgency that swept through the market, convincing many investors to take risks they might not have otherwise taken. But beneath the surface, the rot was already setting in. Harshad and his cohorts had discovered a way to manipulate the market by buying up stocks at low prices and then selling them at high prices. They used shell companies and complex financial instruments to hide their identities and obscure the trail of their transactions. It was a system that relied on greed, deception, and a complete disregard for the rules. As the years passed, Harshad's empire grew exponentially. He became one of the most influential traders in India, with millions invested by ordinary citizens who had fallen prey to his charm and confidence. His success was matched only by his extravagance. He bought luxury cars, mansions, and jewelry, living a life that was utterly out of touch with the struggles of the average Indian. But Harshad's story is also one of cautionary tale. As his empire began to unravel, it became clear that he had been playing with fire. His reckless trading had set off a chain reaction of events that would ultimately lead to his downfall. In 1992, the market crashed, wiping out millions in investments and leaving Harshad's reputation in tatters. The investigation into Harshad's activities was led by Ramnatha Sridharan, a seasoned detective who had spent years tracking down financial irregularities. The case against Harshad was one of the most high-profile in India's history, with allegations of stock manipulation and insider trading that shook the very foundations of the BSE. In the end, Harshad Mehta was sentenced to 2 years in prison for his role in the scam. His empire had come crashing down around him, leaving behind a trail of financial devastation and widespread disillusionment among ordinary investors. As he sat in prison, Harshad realized that his pursuit of wealth and power had cost him everything, including his freedom. Today, Harshad Mehta's name is synonymous with financial greed and deception. His story serves as a reminder of the dangers of speculation and the importance of regulation in protecting ordinary citizens from the excesses of the wealthy elite. As India continues to grapple with the challenges of economic development and social inequality, the legacy of Harshad Mehta remains a potent warning about the perils of unchecked ambition and the corrupting influence of power. In the years since his release from prison, Harshad has maintained a low profile, keeping a distant eye on the markets that he once dominated. But for many Indians, his name will forever be linked to the darkest corners of the financial system, a reminder of the dangers of unbridled greed and the importance of accountability in the pursuit of wealth. The Harshad Mehta scam remains one of India's most infamous financial crimes, a cautionary tale about the devastating consequences of unchecked ambition and the corrupting influence of power. As we reflect on this dark chapter in Indian history, it is clear that the legacy of Harshad Mehta will continue to shape our understanding of the markets and the role of regulators in protecting ordinary citizens from the excesses of the wealthy elite. The story of Harshad Mehta serves as a reminder of the power of human greed and the importance of regulation in protecting the vulnerable. It is a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition and the corrupting influence of power, one that will continue to resonate with investors and regulators alike for generations to come. In the scorching heat of Bombay's stock market, a man emerged from the shadows, his name synonymous with greed and deception, Harshad Mehta, the mastermind behind one of India's most infamous financial crimes. It was the late 1980s SA time when India's economy was struggling to find its footing. The country was plagued by corruption, poverty, and inequality. Amidst this chaos, Harshad Mehta, a young and ambitious trader, saw an opportunity to make his fortune. He had already made a name for himself in the market with his bold trading strategies, but little did anyone know that he had just begun to scratch the surface. Harshad's journey began in 1985 when he started working as a trainee at JRD Tata Group, one of India's largest conglomerates. It was here that he learned the art of trading and made some of his first profitable trades. However, it wasn't long before Harshad left the group to strike out on his own. In 1987, Harshad started his own trading company, Mehta Securities, from a small office in Bombay. With an initial capital of just 50,000, he set out to make a name for himself in the market. His strategy was to buy and sell stocks aggressively, often using borrowed money to fuel his trades. The first major milestone in Harshad's journey came in 1989 when he made a series of high-stakes trades on small-cap stocks like Reliance Industries and Hutchison Telecommunications. His trades were largely successful, earning him a reputation as a shrewd trader. However, it was his use of insider trading tactics that would eventually land him in trouble. Harshad's connections with powerful people helped him get access to sensitive information about upcoming earnings reports and mergers and acquisitions deals. He used this inside information to make highly profitable trades, often selling stocks at the peak of their value and buying them back later at a lower price. As Harshad's wealth grew, so did his ambitions. In 1990, he started to diversify his portfolio by investing in real estate and other businesses. He also began to build relationships with high-net-worth individuals and politicians who would eventually become key players in the scam. One of the most significant decisions Harshad made was to form a group of associates known as the Mehta Mafia. This team of loyal operatives included his cousin, Dilip Mehta, and several other trusted friends. Together, they worked tirelessly to create a complex web of shell companies, offshore accounts, and fake trading records. The Mehta Mafia's strategy was simple: to make money by selling shares to unsuspecting investors at inflated prices. They used fake transactions and cooked books to make the shares appear more valuable than they actually were. The scam was so sophisticated that even some of Harshad's competitors couldn't see through it. As the scam continued to grow, so did Harshad's ego. He became increasingly reckless, using borrowed money to fuel his trades and ignoring warning signs from regulators. It was as if he had become invincible, a master of the universe who could do no wrong. But beneath the surface, the house of cards was starting to show cracks. In 1992, Harshad was summoned by the Securities and Exchange Board of India (SEBI) for questioning about his trading activities. He was warned that if he didn't clean up his act, he would face severe consequences. Undeterred, Harshad continued to push forward with his scam. He even went so far as to bribe SEBI officials to cover up the evidence against him. But it was only a matter of time before the authorities caught on. On 8 September 1992, Harshad Mehta's empire came crashing down. The Bombay Stock Exchange (BSE) halted trading after Harshad's shares plummeted in value. It turned out that he had sold millions of shares at artificially inflated prices, leaving many investors with huge losses. As the news spread like wildfire, Harshad's world began to unravel. He was arrested and charged with multiple counts of insider trading, forgery, and cheating. His associates were rounded up one by one, each facing their own share of charges. The aftermath of the scam was catastrophic. The Bombay Stock Exchange was left in shambles, its reputation tarnished forever. Harshad Mehta's name became synonymous with greed and deception. He was convicted and sentenced to 5 years in prison, a paltry punishment for someone who had ruined lives and fortunes on a scale that defied comprehension. But even as Harshad sat behind bars, the damage was already done. The scam had exposed deep-seated corruption and crony capitalism in India's financial sector. It led to sweeping reforms aimed at curbing insider trading and increasing transparency in corporate dealings. As we reflect on the Harshad Mehta scandal, we are reminded of the dangers of unchecked greed and ambition. We see a cautionary tale about the importance of integrity and accountability in business. And we remember a man who, for his own selfish reasons, brought shame to an entire nation. In the end, it was not just Harshad Mehta's wealth that came crashing down, it was the very fabric of the financial system he had manipulated. His story serves as a reminder that even the most powerful among us are not above the law and that justice will always prevail in the end. It was the summer of 1992, and Harshad Mehta, one of India's most infamous financiers, stood at the pinnacle of his career. He had built an empire on Wall Street, amassing millions in profits from his clever investments and aggressive trading strategies. But little did anyone know that beneath the surface of his success lay a web of deceit and corruption that would eventually lead to one of the largest financial scams in Indian history. Mehta's rise to power was nothing short of meteoric. He had started out as a young stockbroker, working for a small firm in Mumbai. But it wasn't long before he made a name for himself on the street, using his charisma and wit to convince investors to put their trust in him. His mantra, buy, hold, and sell, resonated with many, and soon he had amassed a fortune that made headlines across the country. But as Mehta's wealth grew, so did his ego. He began to take enormous risks, using borrowed money to fuel his trading empire. He convinced himself that the market would always go up, and that he was invincible. And for a while, it seemed like he was right. His profits soared, and he became a celebrity in India's financial circles. However, as the months went by, Mehta began to realize that his luck was running out. The market started to decline, and his profits began to dwindle. He tried to cover his losses by selling off some of his assets, but it wasn't enough. His empire was starting to crumble, and he knew it. The first sign of trouble came when the Bombay Stock Exchange, BSE, banned Mehta from trading for 15 days in January 1992. It was a small setback, but one that made him realize he needed to be more cautious. He tried to regroup, re-strategize, and reinvest his money in new ventures. But it was too late. The next few months were dark times for Mehta. His investors began to lose faith in him, and his empire started to collapse. He was facing lawsuits from disgruntled investors, and his reputation was in tatters. He knew he had to do something drastic to turn things around. Mehta turned to an old trick, the pyramid scheme. It was a familiar tactic, one that many of his contemporaries had used before him. The idea was simple: invest a small amount of money, and you would be guaranteed a higher return on your investment. It sounded too good to be true, but Mehta convinced himself that it could work. He set up a new company, called the Phoenix Mills Company, with the promise of huge returns for investors. He convinced many people to put in their money, promising them a share of the profits. But what they didn't know was that the returns were based on an elaborate web of deceit and manipulation. Mehta had created a system where he would sell stocks to new investors using money from earlier investors. The returns were fabricated, and the money was siphoned off by Mehta himself or his associates. It was a classic pyramid scheme, one that would eventually lead to his downfall. As the months went by, the scam grew bigger and bigger. More people invested, convinced by Mehta's promises of easy riches. But those who were closest to him knew better. They saw the desperation in his eyes, the greed that drove him to do whatever it took to keep his empire afloat. One of them was Rajat Gupta, a young financier who had been a prot of Mehta's. Gupta had seen firsthand the collapse of Mehta's earlier schemes and had warned him about the dangers of pyramid schemes. But Mehta had ignored him, convinced that he knew what he was doing. Now, as the scam collapsed, Gupta found himself trapped in a nightmare from which he couldn't escape. He had invested heavily in Mehta's scheme, and now he was facing a financial ruin that seemed impossible to recover from. Gupta's story is just one of many that highlights the darker side of Mehta's empire. There were countless others who lost their money, their savings, and even their homes. They were left with nothing but debts and despair. But amidst all this chaos and destruction, there was a sense of determination among those who had been affected by Mehta's scam. They refused to give up, refusing to accept that they had been duped by one of India's most notorious financiers. They formed a movement determined to expose Mehta and his associates for what they were, a group of con artists who had preyed on the vulnerable and the innocent. It was a movement that would take years to gain momentum, but eventually it would bear fruit. In 1992, a team of investigators from the Securities and Exchange Board of India (SEBI) launched an inquiry into Mehta's activities. They discovered a web of deceit and corruption that went all the way to the top, a system that had been designed to siphon off millions of dollars from unsuspecting investors. The investigation was a long and arduous one, but eventually, it led to a shocking conclusion. Harshad Mehta had been found guilty of manipulating the stock market, and his empire had come crashing down around him. It was a moment of triumph for those who had fought against Mehta's scam. They had exposed him for what he was, a master manipulator who had preyed on the innocent and the vulnerable. But it was also a sobering reminder that the consequences of such actions are severe and that justice will always be served in the end. As we reflect on the story of Harshad Mehta, we can't help but wonder how someone could have perpetrated such a massive scam without getting caught for so long. It's a question that has haunted many, including those who were affected by his actions. But perhaps the most important lesson from this story is one of perseverance. Despite the setbacks and failures, despite the dark moments and the opposition encountered, Mehta refused to give up. He kept pushing forward, convinced that he could turn things around. And in doing so, he ultimately met his demise. But it's a cautionary tale that we would do well to remember that success is not just about winning, but also about losing with dignity and humility. In the end, Harshad Mehta's story serves as a reminder of the importance of honesty, integrity, and transparency in our personal and professional lives. It's a lesson that we should all strive to live by, no matter what challenges or setbacks we may face along the way. In the annals of Indian financial history, one name stands out as a symbol of greed and deception: Harshad Mehta. His mastermind scam shook the very foundations of the stock market, leaving in its wake a trail of destruction and despair that still resonates today. Harshad Mehta's story begins in the late 1980s when he was just starting out as a stockbroker in Mumbai. He had already made a name for himself with his aggressive trading style and uncanny ability to pick winning stocks. But it wasn't until he joined the Bombay Stock Exchange, BSE, that he hatched his plan to become one of India's most infamous financial crooks. Mehta's scam was based on a simple yet clever concept, using complex trading strategies to create artificial price movements in certain stocks, which would then be exploited by his network of accomplices. He would buy up large quantities of these stocks, creating a false sense of demand and driving prices up to unsustainable levels. Once the market had reached its peak, Mehta would sell off his holdings, making millions in the process. But there was more to Mehta's plan than just simple insider trading. He had also enlisted the help of various shell companies and offshore accounts to launder his ill-gotten gains. This allowed him to move money around the world, hiding it from prying eyes and making it nearly impossible for authorities to track him down. As the years went by, Mehta's scam grew in size and complexity. He became one of the most powerful men on the BSE, with a network of loyal followers who did his bidding without question. His influence extended far beyond the stock market, with connections to some of India's most powerful politicians and business leaders. But all good things must come to an end, and Mehta's empire began to crumble in 1992. The government had finally caught wind of his scheme, and a massive investigation was launched to bring him to justice. Mehta was arrested on charges of stock market manipulation, money laundering, and other financial crimes. The trial that followed was one of the most dramatic in Indian history. Mehta's team of high-priced lawyers argued that he was innocent, while the prosecution presented a mountain of evidence that seemed impossible to refute. But just as it seemed like justice was finally within reach, Mehta disappeared from sight, leaving behind only his loyal followers and a trail of debt that would haunt India for years to come. Despite his disappearance, Mehta's legacy lived on. His scam had left the stock market in shambles, with thousands of ordinary people losing their life savings in the collapse. The government was forced to intervene, imposing harsh penalties on the BSE and establishing new regulations to prevent similar scams from happening again. But Mehta's impact went far beyond the stock market. He showed that even the most powerful men could be brought down by their own greed and ambition. His story served as a warning to would-be crooks, while also inspiring a generation of young Indians to take an interest in finance and business. In 1993, just a year after his disappearance, Mehta was finally tracked down and arrested in a small town in Maharashtra. He was 53 years old at the time, with a fortune estimated to be worth millions. But as he stood before the court, facing charges that would send him to prison for life, it was clear that his reign of terror was finally over. Mehta's trial was one of the most publicized in Indian history, with thousands of people attending every day to catch a glimpse of the infamous stockbroker. His lawyers argued that he had been driven by greed and desperation, while the prosecution presented evidence of his elaborate scheme to swindle millions out of ordinary Indians. In the end, Mehta was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 10 years in prison. But even as he sat behind bars, he refused to apologize for his actions, claiming that he had simply been a victim of circumstances. His legacy may have been one of greed and deception, but it also served as a reminder that even the most powerful men can fall from grace. In the years since Mehta's disappearance, India has made significant strides in regulating its financial markets. The BSE was reformed, with new laws and regulations put in place to prevent similar scams from happening again. And while Mehta himself may be long gone, his impact on Indian finance is still felt today. Mehta's scam serves as a reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and greed. It shows that even the most powerful men can be brought down by their own ambition, and that the law will always catch up with those who seek to exploit others for personal gain. As we reflect on this dark chapter in Indian history, we are reminded that justice may be slow, but it is never far behind. In conclusion, Harshad Mehta's story is one of greed, deception, and ultimately downfall. His scam left a trail of destruction in its wake, with thousands of ordinary people losing their life savings in the collapse. But even as his legacy may live on, we must remember that justice will always prevail, and that those who seek to exploit others for personal gain will never be forgotten. The Harshad Mehta scandal serves as a cautionary tale, reminding us all of the dangers of greed and ambition. It is a reminder that power and wealth are not ends in themselves, but rather means to an end, the betterment of society. and it is a testament to the enduring power of justice, which will always seek out those who seek to exploit others for personal gain. In the end, Harshad Mehta's story is one of a man who let his ambition consume him and paid the ultimate price for his greed. His legacy may be one of darkness and despair, but it also serves as a reminder that justice will always prevail and that those who seek to exploit others will never be forgotten. This documentary has taken you on a journey through the world of Harshad Mehta, from his humble beginnings as a stockbroker to his rise as one of India's most infamous financial crooks. We hope that by sharing his story, we have shed light on the dangers of greed and ambition and reminded you all of the importance of justice and accountability. As we close this chapter in Indian history, we are left with more questions than answers. What drove Mehta to commit such a heinous crime? How did he manage to evade detection for so long? And what lessons can be learned from his downfall? But perhaps the most important question is this: what can we do to prevent similar scams from happening again in the future? The answer lies in education, regulation, and accountability. We must ensure that our financial markets are transparent and regulated, with laws and penalties in place to protect ordinary citizens from exploitation. As we look to the future, let us remember the lessons of Harshad Mehta's story. Let us honor the memory of those who were lost to his scam by striving to create a more just and equitable society for all. And let us never forget that justice will always prevail, no matter how powerful or wealthy an individual may be. The legacy of Harshad Mehta will forever be remembered as one of greed, deception, and ultimately, downfall. His story serves as a warning to would-be crooks, while also inspiring a generation of young Indians to take an interest in finance and business. And as we close this chapter in Indian history, we are left with the knowledge that justice has been served, and that those who seek to exploit others will never be forgotten. This documentary is a tribute to the victims of Harshad Mehta's scam and a reminder that justice will always prevail. We hope that by sharing his story, we have shed light on the dangers of greed and ambition and reminded you all of the importance of accountability and transparency in our financial markets. On the fateful day of 5th March 1992, Harshad Mehta's empire came crashing down in a blaze of scandal and greed, leaving behind a trail of devastation that would shake the very foundations of India's financial system. As we delve into the human stories behind this infamous scam, we find ourselves entwined in a web of personal sacrifices, inspiring individuals, emotional journeys, and untold stories, each one weaving a thread into the intricate tapestry of Harshad Mehta's rise and fall. We begin with Harshad himself, a man whose meteoric ascent from humble beginnings to financial wizardry was nothing short of breathtaking. Born in 1950s Gujarat, Harshad grew up in a middle-class family, where his father, a retired government employee, instilled in him the value of hard work and discipline. However, it was Harshad's mother who played a pivotal role in shaping his early life, a woman so devoted to her son that she sacrificed her own well-being for his sake. As Harshad navigated the complexities of high school and college, he found solace in numbers, an affinity that would serve him well on his journey to financial stardom. But it was not without its costs. His first marriage ended in divorce, a painful experience that taught him the value of resilience and perseverance. And then came the stock market, a realm where Harshad's analytical mind and intuitive instincts merged to create a winning formula. With an uncanny ability to read the market, he built his reputation as a shrewd trader, attracting the attention of India's financial elite. But amidst the glory, There existed an undercurrent of anxiety, one that would define Harshad's personal life for years to come. The pressure to perform, coupled with the weight of expectation from those around him, took its toll on his relationships and mental health. One person who bore the brunt of this turmoil was Harshad's second wife, Madhura. An artist by training, she had met Harshad in 1991, a union that would be marked by periods of intense romance followed by brutal separations. Their relationship was a toxic mix of passion and control, with Harshad dictating the terms of their partnership like a master puppeteer. As Harshad's success reached stratospheric heights, Madhura found herself relegated to the sidelines, an emotional casualty of her husband's all-consuming ambition. Her struggles with depression and anxiety became increasingly pronounced as she watched her marriage disintegrate before her eyes. Yet, amidst this maelstrom of personal struggle, there existed a beacon of hope, a young girl named Divya, Harshad's only daughter from his first marriage. A precocious and inquisitive child, Divya was the very embodiment of innocence, a quality that Harshad found himself increasingly drawn to as he navigated the treacherous waters of his personal life. As we journey deeper into the heart of Harshad Mehta's world, we begin to glimpse the human cost of his actions. We witness Madhura's desperate attempts to cling to her marriage, even as it slips away from her grasp like sand between fingers. We see Divya, now a teenager, struggling to reconcile her love for her father with the cruel realities of his addiction. And then there are the victims, ordinary people who unwittingly became pawns in Harshad's game of financial wizardry. The Mumbai stockbroker, Dinesh Thakkar, who lost everything when Harshad defaulted on a massive loan. The widow, Neeru Jain, whose life was turned upside down by Harshad's Ponzi scheme. Their stories weave together like the intricate threads of a tapestry, each one painting a vivid picture of the devastation wrought by Harshad Mehta's actions. It is a testament to the human spirit, which can find resilience in even the darkest of times. As we explore the world behind Harshad's scams, we stumble upon an unlikely hero, a whistleblower named Ramesh Jain. A man who had witnessed firsthand the inner workings of Harshad's operation and had risked everything to expose him. Ramesh's courage was nothing short of inspiring, a beacon of hope in a sea of corruption. His story serves as a poignant reminder that even in the darkest corners of human nature, there exist individuals willing to stand up for what is right. And then, of course, there are the prison walls that Harshad Mehta would eventually call home. A place where he spent 14 months, his freedom curtailed by his own actions. But even behind bars, Harshad remained a symbol of hope, a reminder that redemption is always within reach, no matter how elusive it may seem. As we conclude our journey into the human stories behind Harshad Mehta's scam, we are left with more questions than answers. What drove this man to such depths of depravity? How did his personal sacrifices and emotional journeys shape him into the man he became? Perhaps the answer lies not in the scandals or the financial figures, but in the quiet moments of introspection that followed Harshad's downfall. Moments when, behind closed doors, he began to confront the demons of his past. For it is in these moments of reckoning that we find the true measure of a man, not in his successes, but in his failures. Not in his triumphs, but in his defeats. It was the day of reckoning for Harshad Mehta, India's most infamous financial crook, but on that fateful morning in August 1992, he had no inkling of the storm brewing. On paper, it seemed like just another successful trading day for the man who had captured the imagination of the nation with his audacious trading strategies and charismatic persona. Behind closed doors, however, A web of deceit was slowly unraveling, revealing the true extent of Mehta's financial empire. His once thriving business had been built on lies, manipulated markets, and insider deals that left investors reeling in debt and heartbroken. The Indian stock market had been turned into a game of chance for the unwary, where the house always won. As we delve into the tangled world of Harshad Mehta's downfall, it becomes clear that his demise was both inevitable and avoidable. A cautionary tale of greed, hubris, and the consequences of unchecked ambition, Mehta's story serves as a stark reminder of the perils of unregulated markets and the dangers of allowing individual fortunes to grow at the expense of the nation. In 1992, Mehta's empire was on the brink of collapse. His stock market strategy had been exposed, leaving investors with massive losses. But it was too late for regrets, as he vanished into thin air, leaving behind a trail of devastation that would forever be etched in Indian financial history. The aftermath of the scam saw several high-profile arrests and convictions. Some of Mehta's top associates, including his business partner, Ketan Parekh, were jailed for their roles in the scandal. Others managed to escape justice, only to resurface later with new identities and hidden fortunes. Years went by, and Mehta himself remained a fugitive, always one step ahead of the law. His whereabouts remained a mystery until his eventual capture in 1994. He was arrested at an airport in Dubai, where he had been living under an assumed identity. The trial that followed was sensationalized by the media, with headlines screaming about the scorched earth strategy employed by Mehta and his cohorts to cover their tracks. The sheer scale of the scam left even seasoned investigators stunned, as they struggled to comprehend the extent of the damage wrought by these masterminds. But as we fast forward to 2026, the legacy of Harshad Mehta still lingers, a reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and greed. The Indian stock market has grown exponentially since his downfall, but with it have come new challenges and fresh scandals. One such development is the rise of online trading platforms, which have made it easier for individuals to buy and sell stocks, but also created an environment where manipulation and insider dealing can flourish. Authorities have taken steps to curb this trend, introducing stricter regulations and monitoring systems to prevent similar scams from occurring in the future. However, despite these efforts, there are still concerns about corruption and crony capitalism at the highest levels of power. The recent collapse of several high-profile business empires has raised questions about the true extent of India's economic elite's connections with corrupt politicians and bureaucrats. In terms of Mehta's current status, he was sentenced to life imprisonment in 1994 for his role in the scam. However, due to good behavior and completing a significant portion of his sentence while under house arrest, he was released on parole in 2001. He has since kept a low profile, rarely speaking publicly about his experiences or seeking redemption. The government has also taken steps to ensure that such scams never happen again. The SCBI Act was amended in 1994 to introduce stricter regulations and stricter penalties for those found guilty of insider trading. The Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, which came into effect in 2016, has helped to recover millions from fallen businesses and individuals. In recent years, the Indian government has taken steps to clean up the stock market, introducing new regulations and increasing transparency. The National Stock Exchange, NSE, and the Bombay Stock Exchange, BSE, India's two largest exchanges, have also strengthened their regulatory frameworks, implementing stricter monitoring systems and penalties for non-compliance. Despite these efforts, however, the legacy of Harshad Mehta continues to cast a long shadow over the Indian financial landscape. His story serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of unregulated markets, individual greed, and the need for robust governance and regulatory frameworks to prevent similar scams from occurring in the future. In conclusion, the Harshad Mehta scam remains one of India's most infamous financial crimes, a cautionary tale of how unchecked power and greed can wreak havoc on the nation's economy. While much has changed since his downfall, the lessons remain the same: vigilance, transparency, and accountability are essential to ensuring that such scams never happen again. In the years since Mehta's capture, India has made significant strides in strengthening its financial regulatory framework. But as we look to the future, one thing is clear: the battle against corruption and crony capitalism will continue to be a long and difficult one. The question remains, what can be done to prevent such scams from occurring again? Only time will tell. In the annals of Indian financial history, there exists a name that strikes fear into the hearts of investors and policymakers alike: Harshad Mehta. His audacious scheme, which duped millions out of their hard-earned savings, still sends shivers down the spines of even the most seasoned financial experts. It was the early 1990s time when India's economy was on the cusp of a boom. The country had just opened its doors to foreign investment, and the markets were flooded with fresh capital. Amidst this frenzy, Harshad Mehta emerged as one of the most influential figures in Indian finance. With his charisma, charm, and uncanny ability to identify emerging trends, he built a reputation as a master investor. But beneath the surface, a sinister game was being played out. Mehta had discovered a weakness in the market system, a lack of effective regulation and oversight. He exploited this void, using his vast network of connections and his own wealth to manipulate the markets. His modus operandi was simple: he would buy up large quantities of stocks, create a false sense of demand, and then sell them at exorbitant prices. As the years went by, Mehta's empire grew exponentially. He became one of the wealthiest men in India, with an estimated fortune of over $1 billion. But his success came at a terrible cost. Millions of ordinary Indians lost their life savings, some even to the point of bankruptcy. The once thriving stock market was reduced to a mere shell of its former self. The authorities were caught off guard by Mehta's audacity. Despite repeated warnings and red flags, they failed to act in time. The scam went on for months, with no end in sight. It wasn't until February 1993 that the Indian authorities finally cracked down on Mehta's operation. He was arrested and charged with a multitude of financial crimes, including insider trading, market manipulation, and money laundering. The fallout from the Mehta scam was devastating. The Indian stock market was left reeling, with millions of investors facing losses they could never recover. The government was forced to take drastic measures to restore confidence in the markets. A new regulatory framework was put in place, one that would prevent such scams from happening again. But the legacy of Harshad Mehta's scam lives on, a cautionary tale of the dangers of unchecked ambition and greed. Even today, investors and policymakers speak of his crimes with a mix of awe and horror. How did it happen? Why didn't someone stop him? The answer lies in the systemic weaknesses that allowed Mehta to operate with such impunity. In India's fledgling financial markets, there was a lack of transparency and accountability. Regulatory bodies were ill-equipped to deal with sophisticated scams like Mehta's. The country's laws and regulations were either inadequate or poorly enforced. As we reflect on the long-term impact of the Mehta scam,